Next, from the state capitol, Republican Senate leaders introduce an alternative budget to the one presented by Governor Quinn. The Republicans propose to spend some $5 billion less than the governor's plan for fiscal year 2012. The Republican senators say while their approach requires painful spending cuts, it would quickly return the state to fiscal health without borrowing. This runs about 30 minutes.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming for part 2 of our budget plan disclosure. You know, we were here last week and talked about the problem that Illinois was facing, and we can't start today talking about cuts without reiterating the dire circumstances that we're facing. So I want to direct you to this chart here just to remind you why we're here today. As we talked about last week, if we don't do anything, 5 years, we have $22 billion deficit. That's a huge problem for this state. That means that not only will the tax go away, the income tax, but we'll probably have to raise taxes again. There is a path to get to this scenario to completely change the trajectory of where this state is going financially and actually end in 2016 with a balance, a $4 billion balance. What we're going to talk about today not only leaves us with a balance here, but it also avoids borrowing, allows us to pay our bills in cash, and to actually remove all of the taxes back down to the original 3% that we had as an income tax in this state. Is that going to be easy to do? No. But again, there is no alternative other than making some difficult and painful cuts. But this exercise is not just about making cuts. It's about a long-term plan. Nobody in this building ever thinks beyond a year or two, and that's what we have to force ourselves to do in order to get right back into the situation that we're in now, even worse, in another 5 years. So what we did, and you'll hear in a great deal of detail in a moment, identified $6.7 billion in potential cuts and savings. Now, what's really unique about our exercise here today is of all the things that we've identified, we are willing to put at least half the votes on those. So we're not just talking about cuts that somebody needs to make somewhere. We're willing to actually vote on these cuts. If other people have other ideas, we're willing to talk to them. We want to know if they're willing to put votes on some of these cuts in order to avoid that scenario. We kept in mind 10 objectives as we moved forward, and that is we needed to grow jobs in this state. We need to reform programs, those that continue to exist. We have to cut spending now. We have to lower taxes, cap spending, pay our bills, stop reckless borrowing, such as was proposed by the governor, have a plan to to have temporary tax actually be temporary, to prevent future bill backlogs by, when we get current with our bills, eliminating the mechanisms that allowed us to get there, and to stop expanding government. The reasons that we need to do this is that if we don't, once again, we'll face the same situation that we faced right now, even worse, and taxes will go up. Our plan has not only cuts, but it also has adjusted revenue projections. So if we talk about cutting Medicaid, we've reduced the federal match. And it's important to note that nobody, we put this out there last week, asked people to challenge us on it, and there's nobody that said this isn't true. That's not the situation we're facing. So this is really time for a reality check about where state government is going. If we don't make the cuts today, we'll be paying for that in a short time. So I want to turn it over to Senator Althoff to make a few additional comments, and then Senator Murphy will be talking about some of the specifics about the cuts that we're proposing.
Thank you, Leader Radogno, and good morning, everyone. Balancing the budget and bringing fiscal stability back to Illinois is certainly a daunting task, as you've just heard. So daunting that if the Greeks were writing the myths today, they'd probably include balancing the Illinois budget as one of the 12 feats of Hercules. And honestly, standing up here, given the choice, I think that most lawmakers would rather slay a hydra than tackle one of the other feats, particularly balancing the budget. But cutting, spending, balancing needs to happen, and it needs to happen today. and that's why we're here. It's time to stop propagating the myths that resolving our fiscal crisis can be done without a significant reduction in state spending. We need to craft a budget based on the cold, hard reality of what it will take to bring Illinois back from the edge of our financial cliff. We're not up here today proposing these spending reductions because we're happy about cutting state spending. Many worthy programs that we've advocated for, would be impacted by our plan. The fact is we have no choice. If we do nothing, the problem doesn't disappear. It gets worse. The pain intensifies. Our friends on the other side of the dispute don't dispute the numbers we released last week that show Illinois would face a $22 billion deficit in 5 years without the type of substantive spending reductions contained in our plan. Instead of the screaming, shouting, and yes, even defiance and running away from their duties and going to other states, actions that we witnessed other states engaging in, here in Illinois, we truly have a unique opportunity to work together and serve as role models, a template, so to speak, for states who are facing similar massive budget shortfalls. It's going to mean sacrifice. It's going to mean painful decisions. Painful, difficult decisions. And it's not going to be easy. But now is the time to put partisanship aside, and truly come together to do the right thing, not only for our state's long-term fiscal future, but for the next generation of Illinois residents. And now with the specifics of our plan, I'd like to introduce my APROP colleague, Senator Matt Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Altoff. Thank you all for being here. You might think that getting this part of the presentation, I drew the short straw, as this is where the difficult part gets laid out. And as Pam said, it is difficult, and none of us relishes much of what we propose here today. But in a way, it's also not difficult, because what's been hard, frankly, has been being part of a state government that continually disappointed the people that did business with it, continually depressed the opportunity for the people we represent by its malfeasance. So while these spending cuts are tough, I look more to where we're going to be if we have the courage to do it today and see a future that's far different from our recent past and present. The reality of the situation is Illinois' fiscal health is poor, and we're going to have to take our medicine. Everybody knows you can't get away with spending more than you take in year after year after year without the bill coming due. Time to take the medicine. I want to start today with some low-hanging fruit. These are items that were in the governor's proposed budget. So less than 2 months after passing a $7+ billion tax increase, we still have in the budget things like the East St. Louis Finance Advisory Authority. And if any of you were at the appropriation hearing on this, your head may still be shaking that we fund this group. We've got an advisory committee created solely to provide financial advice to the city of East St. Louis, run by an executive director who didn't even know that their funding from the state had been cut for about 5 months. And an executive director who took double pay for 6 months. She willingly accepted 6 months of severance for a job she never left. The people of this state didn't just fork over an additional $7 billion to fund that. That program needs to be defunded and dissolved immediately. Similarly, although not as egregious, the Supreme Court Historic Preservation Society. The state gave this group $5 million a couple years back. They have 4 employees that they pay for $95,000 per year on average. The director makes $138,000 a year. On behalf of the people of the state, we want the rest of our $5 million back. Cell phones. There's millions of dollars in state cell phone use. This is something even Governor Brown in California is cracking down on. If he can do it there, we can do it here. State cars, state planes, the things that people who are living, driving on the ground underneath the state planes look at and say, why am I paying more in taxes when that's still going on? These are the types of things that we need to ratchet back. It's the low-hanging fruit. The reality of the situation, of course, though, is that you're not coming up with $5 billion off the fat and the waste and the easy stuff. And I made that point last week, and I hope I've made it consistently over the last number of years, that there's going to have to be real programs and real pain if we're going to get the reward that we look for. And the people who follow the budget down here understand if you're not talking about pensions, Medicaid, and education, you're not real on the budget. And what we have here are some proposals that will have an impact on those programs. Let's start with Medicaid. If we, in Medicaid, first of all, 8 years ago, Medicaid was a $6.5 billion program with about 1.6 million people enrolled. Today, we went from 1.6 million people to 2.8 million people, and from 6.5 billion to 10.4 billion. A massive expansion of our social safety net program, one that frankly is unsustainable. If we were at the national average on eligibility for Medicaid, we would save about $1.6 billion out of our budget. Our target out of Medicaid, and there are a number of different ways to get there, and we are open to any other solutions for how to do this. But if you took and put us at just the national average of states on eligibility for Medicaid, we would save $1.6 billion a year. That's even greater than our target. The truth of the matter is we are not in a position to be any more generous than the national when it comes to Medicaid. Education. Education has been, I think it's fair to say, the number one priority of most legislators and most people as a state funding program. Last year, we spent $28.6 billion in local, state, and federal money on K through 12 education. Our target is to shave $725 million off of the governor's proposed budget on K through 12 education. That is less than 3% of what was spent statewide last year on K through 12 education. Now, if the people of the rest of the state in the private sector can get by on the budget cuts they've been living under for a number of years, I think it's fair for K through 12 to be able to get by on a less than 3% overall cut in 1 year. They can do that without fundamentally compromising what the all-important K through 12 education system, and we're going to ask them to do it. Finally, on pensions. So obviously a very difficult issue and one that causes consternation for a lot of people for good reason. There were promises made, and there is growing question and skepticism as to whether the state is in a position to keep those promises to the extent that they were made. Next year's pension payment, according to the Auditor General, is $6.2 billion. That's over $1 billion more than we're talking about in this proposal today. Many of us are concerned about the state's ability to keep making that commitment. We want to make as much of that commitment as we can, but we think changes need to be made in the system, many of us, to be able to do that. Our target here comes from the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club of Chicago, where they project, based on their plan, which is Senate Bill 105, sponsored by Senator Lawson, $1.35 billion in savings. These are some of the big ticket items that we're talking about. And as the leader mentioned, this is a rollout of ideas. This is a menu of options. What is not an option is walking into a $22.5 billion hole 5 years after the biggest tax increase in state history. That can't happen. I would hope that no matter where you're at in the political spectrum in this building, you would recognize that that is not an option and would be willing to work with us to try to get this done to avoid that result. We have the opportunity, and you'll see it in these numbers, if we have the courage to do what's difficult today, to provide job growth, as many as 400,000 new jobs over the next 5 years, lower taxes on the people of this state, and what a message that sends to job creators, having our bills paid on time, and finally getting out from the embarrassment of the bill backlog they've seen the last number of years, and a balanced budget without borrowing. Now imagine those four concepts being in the same story as the phrase the state of Illinois. That can be real. That can be real. But to get there, we have to get real now. We have to face the reality of the situation we're in and have the courage to do what is hard to make a better future for the people of this state. That is what this plan does. We are open to suggestions. We are open to other people's ideas on where we can do things differently. This is the beginning, we hope, of a productive dialogue and the beginning of a rollout that I would turn it over to Senator Kyle McCarter to explain a little further.
This is a bold yet responsible plan, and I think it shows the people of Illinois we care enough to tell them the truth. And the truth is government cannot continue to live like this, and we have to live within our means. Just like families, businesses, nonprofits have throughout this recession. The only entity that has failed to live within their means is state government. And saying no as Republicans is not enough. This plan also marks a step forward in the way that we communicate to the people of Illinois. The details of the proposal are able for viewing on the internet at illinoisrealitycheck.com. Included on the site is a short video explaining the financial problem, its impact on the lives of Illinois residents, and what can be done to address this issue. I believe that we are in tune with the way people communicate today, the way you communicate with your friends at home, outside of this Capitol, and the plan will be available on your cell phone immediately, and I think it'll make an impact on you and your family. As you read it and pass it along to your friends, I think we're going to see change in this state. The power to change direction lies within the people. I encourage the citizens to get informed, involved, and join us in setting Illinois back on the path of financial stability. Again, this state government must live within its means, and we need a reality check. Now remember, illinoisrealitycheck.com, illinoisrealitycheck.com, and saying no is not enough. Thank you.
Well, as you can see, a lot of thought has gone into this, a lot of work. Again, this is a challenge to the Democrat leaders to sit down with us and figure out how we change to the black on this chart. We have got to change the direction of this state, and we can do it. We're willing to help. Again, to put on it, we mean it, so we look forward to working with the Democrat leaders. With that, we will be happy to try to answer any questions.
Have you shown us the Democratic leaders yet? What was the response?
Well, obviously, they're aware of what we talked about last week, and we challenged them, as we challenged you, to say that these numbers are incorrect. They're not. They've talked in general about cutting. I have spoken to Senate President Cullerton, told him we were working on this. I'm sure they're very anxious to see what we've got.
Do you anticipate that they will be willing to be genuine about dealing with doing this?
Well, that's a good word, genuine. And I guess, we had a lot of trepidation in our caucus as to how specific we wanted to be, because if you're going to be genuine about fixing the problem, you've got to be specific. I'm not interested in playing a lot of games. We're showing more of our hand than I think has been done in this building for a long time, but the stakes are so great that we have to do that. So I'm hopeful that they will be genuine.
Some of these areas you talk about targeted savings, but don't really specify, and you lay out options that could be considered, but you don't say exactly what you guys are endorsing.
Any idea on there, we would be willing to put at least half the votes on. Okay, so there may be some areas that have even more, but there's more than one way to get to the savings number. We're open, these are some options. There's some options that aren't even on there. For example, on the pension issue, Senate President Cullerton talked about moving the cost of the pension systems onto local districts. That we didn't include. We'd welcome him to how many votes does he have for that? Perhaps there are some in our caucus. So we're not saying that we have every answer, but what we're saying is we need to get real, and we need to get real right now.
What about the issue that's been brought up recently, the constitutionality of, changing around how the pensions are paid out? How are you going to address that?
Well, there is a pension working group, which is a good thing. They will be hearing from both sides. As you know, that is a question that's open. There are differing opinions on that. But to do nothing and just, well, gee whiz, we can't do it, is not an option. I mean, the other option is a constitutional amendment, I suppose. But let's see what the facts are first, and if it needs to go to court, it needs to go to court. This is a problem we can't be timid about and just say, well, we can't do this because of that, can't do this because of that. Or the alternative, again, is we are just in the financial abyss.
Can you walk us through your pension saving plan?
We basically use the Civic Federation plan. That's the savings.
Which would do what?
It's Senate Bill 105, Senator Lawson's bill is essentially an adoption of the Civic Committee's proposal to provide 3 options for current employees. The first option would be to stay in the current system at a significantly higher price, which it's interesting that there's discussion in other states right now about doing the same thing. Second option is for current employees to go into the new defined benefit plan that began January 1st for employees hired on January 1st, 2011 or later. And then the last option would be to go into a defined contribution plan for current employees going forward with a 6% employer match. And incorporated in all of this is that everything you've earned to date in the current system, you will get under the rules of the current system. But after passage of this proposal, you will be in a different system.
Senator, what are your presumptions of national economic growth? Because obviously the Illinois economy exists within the national economy.
Well, by and large, we have taken the governor's 2 percentage point growth projection. We've seen a little bit of, we project some increases on the back end up to 4% by 2016 of economic growth in the state. We predicate that on the national situation. We predicate it on the state being in a better fiscal situation because of the steps we're taking, including some of the reforms, which would include work comp reform and other measures that Senator Dillard's work group will be rolling out soon. But that is sort of the projection. It's not too terribly far off from where the governor is, but we do project some growth if we do smart things now in the out years.
Let me ask a political question. Some of the critics of the Republicans would say, here you're saying it's so bad, and yet just think how bad it would have been if we hadn't passed the tax increase which you all opposed. Would you answer,
Sure.
address that issue?
Yeah, we had this discussion yesterday when the repeal bill failed to make it out of the subcommittee. When the Democrats voted for the tax increase, they prioritized state spending at current or higher level above job growth, because most people would agree that higher taxes do not support higher job growth. We felt at the time and continue to feel that the priority should be job growth and job opportunity for the people of the state. That's why we opposed the tax increase at the time. That's why we're putting forth a plan right now that will get rid of it as soon as it's practicable in the current political environment with regard to who's in charge.
I can't remember what the figure was that Quinn had for education this year, but you're talking about lowering it to 700. His proposal, is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that lower it beyond what the current level is in the current fiscal year?
I believe it would go with Governor Quinn's proposed budget. I think 725 would take it down. But again, in the context of the overall spending on K through 12 with local property taxes and federal money, that reduction is less 3%.
What is the number you're using for the bill backlog, and how fast, under your plan, would you be able to pay that back?
We anticipate a bill backlog of GRF bills of about 4.35 billion, which we anticipate being gone in less than 2 years if we do this.
So you take a lot of this new money from the tax increase and go towards paying down bills, is that?
In the near term, that would effectively, that would probably be a fair way of putting it.
On the head count for employees, where do you think that, have you looked at that, and where do you think that should be? Are we properly staffed right now, or are we overstaffed in your estimation? How does?
Well, the governor proposed a 950 employee headcount increase this year. In general, we are opposed to adding headcount, with one, I think, significant exception. Over the last few years, we have advocated for a higher headcount in corrections to bring down the overtime costs. Those were up over $50 million just in that department not too long ago. And so in that one area, we think you can save money with an increased headcount, but beyond that, our plan does not contemplate headcount increases.
Have you identified which Republican senators are on board with this plan? How many, you mentioned the number of votes, but have you identified who?
We're all on board with the plan and the concept that we need to change the trajectory of state government. What I'm saying with respect to specific proposals, we would put 15 votes at a minimum on any of these ideas. Now, some of them have much broader support, obviously everyone runs in their individual district, but we're all on board with the plan and we will support cuts.
Do you think that, given a closer look at the numbers, that the Quinn's administration will shoot you straight to the campaign on the numbers that were drawn?
Not at all. Governor Quinn misled the people in several ways. One is his tax increase. Although his budget director told New York they need a 2% increase, he pledged not to raise it more than 1%. And has turned his back on the people of Illinois by raising the tax 2% and taking a week's pay. I called for more cuts. Governor Quinn called for cuts, but we can see that he asked and was authorized a 10% increase in spending this year. He's not serious about tackling the problems of state spending. The insider deals that we continue to see, as reported just a couple days in the Panagraph, and others show that Governor Quinn is not sincere in cutting spending or right-sizing state government. That's what this proposal is all about, and someone's got to speak up for the people of Illinois. If we don't, we're going to continue to see the erosion of jobs, higher unemployment, and less state revenues.
Have you examined the economic impact if the state were to borrow the $8 billion governor is proposing, and where that would lead us in, say, 4 or 5 years?
Let me speak to that, and then I'll turn it over to Leader Radogno. One of the bigger problems is that just digs a deeper hole in the backs of our children and grandchildren, and frankly, a preponderant amount of the interest payments would go to support other economies outside of the state of Illinois. It's a false promise, and a promise that further would erode the job climate in Illinois.
There's no identified way to pay that money back, and in fact, some of the borrowed money actually supports a level of spending that we can't afford, and it really just masks the deficit and makes a bigger cliff. I mean, the fact is, when we have to pay it back, we still end up in that $22 billion deficit situation. So you can't borrow your way out of it. You have to make some cuts. It's the only way to do it. Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.